Hello students, I hope you enjoyed that last lesson on the underwater kingdom of Neritica. A nice ocean vacation far from the horrors we will now have to explore. The next three subjects we are going to discuss are rather unpleasant. The first being the Abyssal Dwarves. Surrounding the twisted maw known as the Abyss, you can hear the brutal and soul-crushing sounds of industry. Machines clank, metal picks pierce at the earth, and the screams of various races echo across the cavernous depths. In this bronze and stone hellscape, you will find the home of the Abyssal Dwarves, a corrupted people that had its true beginnings during the God War. Dwarves have always had a love of all things precious, whether it be rare metals that shine just right in torchlight, or beautiful gems that twinkle in moonlight. Although not prone to gaudiness, the odd diamond in a set of armor, or a modest but still intricate golden crown is not unheard of. However, during the God War, this appreciation of the finer metals became something much more sinister. As the dwarves fought alongside the Shining Ones against their Wicked One counterparts, Oskan, father of lies and the most powerful of the Wicked Ones, saw the love of rare metals in the dwarves and twisted it, turning it from simple appreciation to obsession. Although not instantly obvious, it slowly corrupted the dwarves over time. If a dwarf wasn't careful, they could find themselves obsessed with the gaining of riches and power, ignoring clan and kin, or worse, using them like tools for the dwarf's dark purposes, losing all sense of reason or duty in favor of personal ambition. Strangely enough, fighting this corruption, this gold lust, has become almost a point of pride for the dwarves, another trial they must endure in a society that values endurance. However, not all dwarves can resist this corruption, and the results of failing to resist it first reared its head after the God War. After that devastating conflict, many dwarves chose to travel to the metal-rich mountains surrounding the Abyss. Although warned by the warsmiths of its dangers, these dwarves, perhaps the greediest and thus the most likely to be swayed by corruption, chose to ignore them and set their sights to gaining the vast wealth around those rich mountains. Although they kept contact with their southern kin for a while, the later war with Winter caused these distant kin to lose all contact, and it was only centuries later that the fate of these dwarves became known. These now Abyssal Dwarves were now dark reflections of their former selves. Although they had lost none of the strength and endurance of their untainted kin, their time near the Abyss has twisted their forms. Their skin sickly pale with slovenly bodies due to their reliance on slaves. And while the twisting of their bodies is disgusting, the twisting of their minds is far worse. Within them is a lust for power and wealth that borders on the obscene. They flaunt their status with armor and weapons so full of precious metals and gems its gaudiness sickens even the most arrogant of human nobles. And their lust for power knows no end, as they constantly aim to remove those in their way to gain ultimate authority. Unlike their untainted kin, there is no clan or family loyalty for an Abyssal Dwarf, simply the binding powers of greed, self-interest, and domination. The sad truth is that this lust for power can never be truly extinguished, the dwarf always aiming to conquer and gain more wealth, at least until another dwarf inevitably takes their place in the most devious and usually brutal way possible. Beyond their twisted minds and bodies, their time near the Abyss has effectively made them immune to the effects of aging, although it does seem to come at a price. It is believed that the Abyssal Dwarves can no longer reproduce, for no dwarven children have ever been reported from those slaves who were lucky enough to escape their hellish home. The only way these Abyssal Dwarves seem to increase their number is by those southern dwarves who were corrupted by their gold lust and were called to the north to join their tainted kin in the city they call home, the industrial hell pit, known as Tragar. The city of Tragar is actually two temple cities that each take one side of the massive chasm known as the Abyss. Names Arak and Dwi, the dwarf words for power and pain, These cities are massive, ever-expanding constructs wrought of stone, iron, and brass. Covering most of its buildings are leering and blasphemous carvings of abyssal demons, and horrible acts that the dwarves have committed and will continue to commit in the future. Surrounding these cities are vast mountains and foothills where the dwarves gather most of their orc, giant, and troll slaves. Each city contains several temple bastions that act as districts which contain various workshops, barracks, temples, commerce areas, and guilds. And each temple bastion is ruled over by an overmaster or an iron caster, the two leader castes of the Abyssal Dwarves. These leaders constantly scheme against each other, looking for any weakness to exploit to gain more power for themselves, while keeping an eye on their subordinates who are doing the same to them. Far outnumbering the dwarves are the slaves. Many are captured from far-off lands. Some are born into the life, knowing only bondage and pain, and others are bred for it, for dark purposes that it's best not to imagine. And the type of work given depends on the slave. Dwarven slaves are assigned as miners and smiths. Elves are turned into amusing playthings. Humans are given the most grueling and demeaning tasks, and goblins are made into pathetic house servants. Orcs, however, are only good for one thing: war. A task they relish. As much as they despise their bondage, it's quickly forgotten if the dwarves can point them to an enemy they can rip apart. They are usually assigned to a slave herder, to ensure that the orc slaves are pointed in the right direction. While most of the slave herders are assigned to orcs, the trainees are given command over mutated mastiffs, to ensure they gain the experience they need to take charge of the more valuable, if still expendable, orcs. Eventually, all slaves outlive their usefulness. Those slaves who are deemed no longer of use are sent to the Great Spears. The Great Spears are long archways that stretch out from the twin cities and end over the abyss. Every day, thousands of slaves are forced to walk these archways, and are thrown into the pit below. The screaming and soon-to-be eternally tortured souls sacrificed to the Wicked One Eskan and his 26 Abyssal Lords. Now, as previously mentioned, Abyssal Dwarf society is based on greed and lust for power. Its leadership is fluid and ever-changing, a dwarf expanding their domain to a minor empire within the city, making and breaking alliances, and eventually falling when a much more brutal, clever, or just lucky dwarf takes their place. And in this chaotic society, the one who rules it all with an iron fist is the Overking, a brutal warlord who keeps their fellow dwarves in a tight leash while looking into ways to increase their power. And one sure way for all dwarves to increase their power and status, whether it be the martial overmasters or the sorcerous iron casters, is through war. Now, you would think a society built on treachery and greed would fail to hold together as a fighting force in the long run. Sadly for the other races of Mantica, this is far from the case. The dwarves, when called to battle, can work together for a common cause, each knowing the best path for personal wealth is through victory on the battlefield. That isn't always true, as some careless leaders have fatally found out, but a leader can be fairly sure of the loyalty of their subordinates if they can guarantee victory, at least until the battle is done. However, if a leader wishes for some extra assurance, they are known to form cults. Unlike the southern dwarves, the Abyssal Dwarves are a very religious people, all of them constantly praising the Wicked Ones. As such, charismatic dwarves can convince their followers that they are the hand of their god, the Wicked One pointing the individual towards victory. This forms a religious fervor in many which ensures the loyalty of their subordinates. Well, at least until the dwarf has had enough defeats to make their minions question the legitimacy of their prophet. The core of any Abyssal Dwarf fighting force are the dwarves themselves, armed with arms and armor comparable to their southern kin, and further enhanced by the dark magic of the Iron Casters. They are steadfast and resolute warriors who will only accept complete domination on the battlefield. The Black Souls are the backbone of any Abyssal Dwarf army, willing to receive brutal attacks from the enemy upon their tight formations and iron shields. Once the enemy has expended their might, the dwarves strike back with heavy axes and hammers. shattering the now exhausted foe. Decimators carry short-range black powder weapons that fire grape shot that can rip flesh from bone. These thunder pipes, as these weapons are called, inflict horrible and painful injury, and the Decimators love being in close range to view the effects of these weapons, before the souls who are unlucky enough to survive are dragged to the slave pits. The Immortal Guard are living suits of armor fused into the terrible bloodthirsty semblance of a dwarf. These formerly living dwarves are gifted with eternal life by the Ironcasters. Their bodies essentially turn into machines that can be reinforced and repaired like any device. In order to become an Immortal Guard, the dwarf must contain something most find impossible to even comprehend: true loyalty. They must dedicate themselves to the service of a title, not an individual, but a title. The dwarf swearing to serve whoever holds that leadership position till they are completely destroyed, or until another dwarf is able to kill whoever holds that position without the immortals noticing. Over time, the dwarves of the Immortal Guard lose themselves completely in their role, becoming nothing more than obedient machines encased in gilded armor. Unlike the berserkers of the southern dwarves, who rage due to an inner pain, the berserkers of the Abyssal Dwarves are part of a dark and vicious cult. They are willing to give up their souls for promises of endless slaughter, and it is only through killing can they hope to stave off the eternal damnation that their dark deal eventually promises. And the head of these dwarves, as well as the forces of the Ironcasters, although that is debatable, is the Overmaster. Whether through the order of the Overking, or their own personal ambition, they go out into the world to conquer, raid, and dominate in the name of their great city Tragar, and the Wicked Ones. Now the Abyssal Dwarves, at least compared to their southern kin, are thankfully low in number, and thus they must supplement their forces. Some of this is done through slaves. The orcs, trolls, goblins, and ratkin, a race I will discuss in a later class, thrown at the enemy like chaff before the dwarves come in to shatter them. However, the dwarves can also depend on a variety of created weapons to use on the battlefield. Weapons crafted by the other ruling class, the Ironcasters. The other ruling class of the Abyssal Dwarves, the Ironcasters, commune with the Wicked Ones and wield unnatural dark powers, and are usually simply advisors to the Overmasters in any conflict. However, that depends on the army. In some, the Overmaster is able to command the true loyalty of the Ironcaster, whether through fear or promises. In others, the Ironcaster is the true master, with the Overmaster being simply a puppet for their own dark designs. The balance of power between Overmaster and Ironcaster has always been tenuous. However, few Overmasters, despite how dangerous these Ironcasters could be, are willing to go into battle without the dark creatures under the Ironcaster's control. Many Ironcasters are fascinated by the manipulation of flesh, crafting monsters that are both truly terrifying and usually short-lived. The most common are the half-breeds, a strange amalgamation of bull-like quadruped and dwarf. These fast-moving and tough creatures are feared by many. Generally unruly and unpredictable, these creatures are sent into the enemy like a mindless stampede. A rare few, however, have the spark of intelligence, and have been shown to earn enough respect from the Abyssal Dwarves to allow it to lead them into battle. Grotesques, on the other hand, have no chance of gaining that spark of intellect. They are horrible, multi-limbed creatures who only know pain and rage, and lash out at everything nearby. Usually lasting only a few months due to their unnatural biology, they are usually quickly shipped to a battle and unleashed. Any surviving grotesques are quickly put down after a battle to ensure they don't strike back at their dark masters. Strangely enough, among these biological creations, you will often find gargoyles. These minor abyssal demons find a strange kinship with these tortured souls, and will often accompany them into battle. While some Ironcasters revel in the exploration of the biological, others gain equal satisfaction with the exploration of the mechanical. For example, golems are large, hunched humanoids made of stone and brass and are powered by the twisted magic of the abyss itself. Although dim-witted and slow, their heavy fists and magma cannons can lay waste to any foe. The most destructive of their kind are the greater obsidian golems that can tear down castle walls or crush enemy regiments with ease. Hellfanes are brass shrines blazing with the hellfire and malice of the abyss. It channels its dark powers into nearby Abyssal Dwarves, granting them great power and strength. The range of the device is limited, so the devices are built upon great constructed creatures in the shape of beasts to carry it into the battlefield. Hexcasters are small, insectoid constructs bound to runes of hatred and spite. They are capable of manipulating the flow of fortune and magic to bring ill omens and bad luck to their master's foes, or, if the Ironcaster is feeling vengeful, a particularly stubborn overmaster. You will also see mortars, rocket launchers, and flamethrowers deployed by the Ironcasters, weapons that are designed to cause as much devastation and pain as possible. You will often find these weapons decorated with the leering faces of Abyssals, a physical representation of the bound minor demons the dwarves have trapped within those weapons to enhance the weapon's power and durability. The ultimate goal of any Abyssal Dwarf force is conquest. Abyssal Dwarves view all other races with contempt, seeing them all simply as future slaves to their rightful masters, which is rather funny when you think about it. For all of their beliefs about their superiority, ultimately, they are simply slaves, compelled to answer the call of the wicked ones whenever the abyss gains in strength. One example of their call to war was the conquest of the Halpi Mountains, a bit of history I will speak on when I discuss the free dwarves in a future class. Well, class, I hope you weren't too sickened by today's lesson. For now, enjoy the rest of the day, because next class, we will discuss the Empire of Dust. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on the Abyssal Dwarves in the Kings of War setting. If you like it, please like, subscribe, comment, press the little bell so you know whenever I post, etc, etc. And if you really like it and you're inclined, please send a little of my money through my Ko-fi or my Patreon account. The extra money gives me the time I need to work on these stories that I love. Thanks for listening / watching, and see you next time for the next video.